Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the weekly assignment where executive producer Sam Osterhout and I talk to you about what's coming up this week for Lincoln Square, the latest headlines, and what we can do to fight back against authoritarianism. Hey, Sam, how you doing?
That sounds like a long list of items to achieve in
a half hour. We're ambitious.
Yes, we are. We're nothing if we're not ambitious. How are you doing? How's your weekend?
Oh, pretty good. Fall is definitely here. We have a hard frost, so it won't be long probably before we get snow because it's Michigan. How about yours?
Upstate New York hasn't had a lot of snow the past few years, and it's kind of depressing. We get our ski passes, and it's, skiing in the Northeast is like ice skating down a mountain, basically.
There you go.
But even more so lately.
Well, coming up today, we have two really special guests. We've got the two Joes, Joe Trippi and Joe Klein, who are the hosts of our new podcast, Two Joes. So we're really excited to have them. But first, Sam, I thought we could talk a little bit about how Trump has been administering disaster relief. He has been very good about approving disaster relief for red states, not so much for blue states. And I thought back to his first term because I remember that there was an article where some of his staff had to sit him down to get him to approve disaster relief for California. And what they did is they showed, Mr. President, but you got millions of votes here. You actually got more votes, from Republicans in California than like all of these, small blue states combined. So you have to do it. But now he doesn't have those guardrails. He doesn't have the same staff. And so he's been, for instance, very eager to approve disaster relief for Alaska, not so much for Maryland.
I find this to be, well, first, I thought about the previous administration as well, his first term, when he was throwing paper towels at people who just suffered through devastating losses. And I think that he doesn't have the capacity to understand that this kind of strategic heavy lifting, because if he wanted to gain more votes, he would rebuild, right? He would serve blue as well as red, and he's not. He doesn't care. It's not a value add to him. And I think that for me the most fascinating thing is any support that he gives, he's signaling that it's tokenism.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You are getting support not because you yourself deserve support, or because you're an American, or because the country will be better off if we're all better off, but because we're gonna, fuck the liberals. Like that's it. Mm-hmm. We're just gonna screw the libs. And if you are in a disaster area and you happen to be a Republican, that should scare the hell out of you, because if your district voted blue, God forbid, you lose.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wins in this.
Right. And even in looking at where this latest round of disasters hit in Maryland, it was in red counties.
Right.
And so they're getting screwed just because they happen to be a blue state. I mean, it's just a ridiculous way to do policy. And I don't need to tell you that if Joe Biden decided that he wasn't going to give disaster relief to Texas, that this would be a story for months and months. Here, it's just a blip on the radar, which is why we try and, we talk about stories that may have gotten short shrift for the week on the weekly assignments. But, you were going back to the famous paper towels incident with Trump. And that was when Puerto Rico had, just incredible devastation during his first term. And the death toll, I think, we've never really quite put an accurate number on that. And his attitude was, these folks aren't really Americans, which they are. I mean, they do have American citizenship, but this went back, to his immigration policies and demonizing, Spanish speaking people. And, that was, I think, a blueprint for him and how he wanted to do things during his second term, which is, revenge-based policy. If you voted for me, maybe I'll help you. If you didn't, you're on your own. And you've got that famous picture. I think we've got it, from like just days into a second term, where we had the devastation of these LA fires. We've now found that they were arson. This was an environmental policy. He was making all of these absurd claims about, that he was going to release water, hundreds of miles away. But anyway, he came to California, and Gavin Newsom met him on the tarmac, and you've got the famous picture of him, putting his finger in Trump's face. Mm-hmm. And, another thing that we've realized is, as most bullies do, Trump tends to crumple when he's actually confronted. And, he did back down to some degree in that fight. It'll be interesting to see how, these blue state governors end up dealing with Trump, because natural disasters aren't going anywhere. We know that climate change is making things worse. We actually had a very benign hurricane season so far, but there are no guarantees.
Well, here's the thing. First, the hurricane season was actually quite intense. It just nothing really hit land.
Right. Exactly.
5 or so Category 5 storms, something like that. Melissa is about to totally devastate Haiti and Jamaica. That is going to be epic. I think, even with the wildfire situation with Gavin Newsom, his solution was to have the Army Corps of Engineers, release a dam, which it was superfluous. It didn't make any difference except to the farmers who relied on the water that had been pent up.
Right.
So even his solutions for disasters just create more problems. But I think I don't know if I can tie this, like if this is going to be neat to tie to, but I'm going to try it anyway. The idea that that no one is safe in this country, is so long as he's making ambiguous selections for who gets resources and who doesn't, then I think about due process as well, and I think about ICE, and I know this is a weird connection, but I think about these ICE guys on the street yanking people out of cars, throwing people on the street, no due process. I think about the Venezuelans and the South Americans who are being killed on boats without due process. Any ICE person should understand that due process protects them as well. Mm-hmm. And if you're just picking out a particular trait of some person to pick on, that trait, then they could pick on traits of yours, right? If you're relying on some random reason to get resources during a disaster, all things are not equal. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It should scare everyone, red and blue.
Yeah. I was thinking a lot about a column that Lisa Senecal, our founding editor, wrote over the weekend that we published, which was really interesting on, how Gen Z tends to view politics and what we get wrong. And obviously this is, something that's of great interest to me. I have, 2 Gen Z kids in their 20s who are very politically aware, but obviously have a totally different perspective than I do. But, her point was that, the way we approach things is like, well, there was a time when Democrats and Republicans would come together and disaster relief, for instance, would not be politicized. And wouldn't it be great if we would get back there? And her point was, for a lot of Gen Z voters out there, that's just a reality they don't even remember. All they remember is this petty squabbling. And if you immerse yourself in right-wing media, you would think that this is how Obama and Biden did administer disaster relief, because anything was perceived as a slight against the great unwashed in the red states. And there's a whole lot of misinformation out there. I mean, just remember right before the 2024 election, there were so many stories that the Biden administration wasn't giving enough relief to North Carolina, for instance, that was going through devastating floods. And in reality, all those stories about FEMA's ignoring us and they don't care. And a lot of that was just misinformation, as even Republican members of Congress were trying to say on air. But it's kind of baked in as an article of faith that, yeah, this is just how things work. Democrats screw Republicans and Republicans screw Democrats. And so I think that there's kind of this sense of everything is messed up. And so what do we do? But in reality, this is a real break from how things have been done in the past. And you can't have a United States of America if it's just one set of rules for states that vote for the president and another set of rules for those who don't.
Yeah, it feels, we've always talked about Trump being ideologically divisive, but this feels viscerally or literally divisive. Like he's actually sorting Americans into two specific physical groups. And that's not good. We know where that ends. It's
right.
Not a good place.
Well, I think that this would be a good time for us to bring on Joe Trippi. He's, our very own from the Lincoln Project, a veteran Democratic strategist. Joe Klein is just a legendary political columnist and author. They have a great new show together. It's the Two Joes podcast. You can see it right here in Lincoln Square, also where you get your podcasts on YouTube. And we are trying to bring back the idea of civilized debate. We've got two Joes that come from a little different side of the political spectrum, each of them. But it's about trying to hash through these very important issues that we're all dealing with and come up with some really good, positive solutions. So thank you both for taking the time to be here relatively early on a Monday morning.
Good to be here, Susan.
Yeah, good to be here. Just don't ask us which one's the other Joe.
Okay.
Well, I'm not the other Joe.
Okay. We
won't ask. Don't ask, don't tell.
So tell us how you guys came up with this idea for a podcast, because, you're so natural in the way that the two of you talk to each other. Obviously, you've been friends forever. How did you get the idea that you decided, you know what, we think this would be kind of fun to do as a show every week?
Well, we've been talking about doing this for like years. I mean, every time we meet at a bar and talk to each other, we would say, hey, I think Joe's obviously has great stories. I mean, from everything from covering Iraq to covering politics. And I have a knack. I mean, I think for both being able to real moments that I've lived through that sort of educate folks about where we might be. But more than that, we come at it from two different places. I mean, as a journalist and as a strategist, and we also don't agree on everything, but agree more than not. And so I think and I bring to it, I think, the strategist's ability to read a poll and get Joe's response to what that actually might mean from something he's saying. So it's a different approach than the usual, than a lot of the things that are out there.
Well, I can tell you exactly when the idea was born, although we did have many years of practice in taverns. But we were having drinks on a terrace in Key West, Florida, and we were trading stories. And I want more stories from Joe as we go ahead, because he has the best stories ever. But what happened was Joe's wife, Kathy, took a look at the two of us as we were sipping vodka and said, "You guys should do a show. You could call it the Two Joes." And my wife Victoria immediately said, "Yeah, that would be a natural." And I think it is. I think it's a natural for a couple of reasons. One is that while we may not agree on everything, I don't know if I agree with myself about everything, but we both come from a place in the center of the spectrum, and we both are some semi-outlaws. I may be more of an outlaw than Trippi, because he's got to have clients to survive. These days, all I have to do is have a computer to survive, but the thing is that we're not afraid of thinking outside the box. And the striking thing, to me about the Democratic Party right now is that there isn't very much of that. So much of the language that you hear from Democrats is the same old language you've been hearing from Democrats for over 30 years. I think that there was this one magic moment in 1991 in a focus group that Stan Greenberg conducted, where he hit upon the fact that if you ask people what they wanted the government to invest in, they were much more favorable to that idea than if you ask them, what do you want the government to spend money on? And that to me was the beginning of an era of really new and creative language use by Democratic candidates. And Joe can correct me here because it was probably going on before that. But that moment to me and the creation of Bill Clinton and Bill Clinton's way of figuring out how to reach out to people, that was as fresh as could be. And now it's as stale as could be. And I think that what we've begun to learn and what Donald Trump has taught us is that if you don't piss people off, you don't have any credibility, and that includes your own supporters. And so, the way politics is practiced has really shifted in the last 5-10 years. If there's going to be any Democrat who figures this out, it's going to be Trippi. So I want to hang on for the ride, perhaps hang on for dear life. But that's what we're doing here.
Yeah, I do think it's true about the two rebels. I mean, I've never been inside the inner sanctum of the consultant class of the Democratic Party. I guess it's why one of the reasons I think I'm the only Democrat who joined the Lincoln Project as a senior advisor, because I saw actually that Rick Wilson and Stuart Stevens and the gang understood exactly what Joe's talking about, how sort of a strength of the messaging and the language that Democrats just don't, the Democratic consultants don't understand or don't use. So, and that's why, when a couple of people like Seth Moulton or Ro Khanna were challenging Democratic incumbents, and if you worked for them, you'd never eat lunch in Washington again. As I was told by a lot of people in the party, I went to work for them, and they're now members of Congress. Actually, coming from two different perspectives, obviously, Ro in Silicon Valley and Seth, and now running against Markey in Massachusetts for the Senate. But it's no one you wouldn't have worked for either one of them if you were really afraid of the sort of the Democratic establishment or status quo or whatever. And so. And you just saw Joe immediately take us back to 1991 with a very, very good read on when things happen and how they change. And that's the kind of talk we do on the shows that we intend to have on Two Joes.
We also tend to know, Joe, as I've said many times, can, X-ray a poll better than almost anybody. And as from what I bring to the table, I think I described it in the novel Primary Colors, which or my significant other self wrote back in the day about the 1992 presidential campaign. But I described the candidate, obviously inspired by Bill Clinton, as having big ears. And for me, I've always listened very, very hard to what politicians say. And every once in a while, you'll hear them hit on a locution that makes wonderful sense and that gives you an insight into, and other times they're just phoning it in. And I got to say, most times, most politicians are phoning it in. But I'll give you a big ears moment. Over the weekend, the New York Times ran a piece about farmers in Iowa and how their livelihoods had been crushed by Trump. And, usually these survey articles reflect only the reporter's prejudice. But in this case, if the reporter was looking for people pissed off at Donald Trump, he couldn't find any. These farmers whose livelihoods are being taken away, especially soybean farmers, and that market's going away. I mean, it's, Brazilian soybeans are apparently a little bit better qualitatively than ours and cheaper. And these are people who have lived on the land, some of them for 100 years, and their livelihoods being taken away by decisions that Donald Trump made, and they cannot bring themselves to say a negative word about the guy. And that tells me something that we have to be thinking about, which is, how was that connection made between Donald Trump and these people? And how, if ever, I mean, we perpetually wait for the moment when people say, oh, he's full of it, I can't support this guy anymore. And yet it never comes.
I think there's, speaking of Bill Clinton and Obama, kids like Gen Z these days, they don't understand just how inspiring Bill Clinton was to young Democrats of the time, and then how disappointing or disappointed we could be. And I think now Democrats see our own trajectory of being inspired and disappointed and wonder why MAGA base continues to just be inspired. Why don't they turn that screw?
It seems to me that, if you are a diehard Trump voter, that's your identity, and you really, you're very committed to Donald Trump. And tell me if I'm wrong, Joe Trippi, but I don't see that there's anyone on the Democratic side who inspires that kind of loyalty. And I don't know if that, let's talk about if that's even a good thing.
Well, I mean, the first thing I'd say is we haven't created a place where someone could inspire that kind of loyalty. When in the Dean campaign, we created this thing called Blog for America,
right?
Where I would get 650,000 people on it, and I would get on every morning, or Howard actually would get on every morning and post something. And then by noon, I would post something like, hey, Fred, that's a great idea, and Howard's going to say it tonight in his speech. And he did. And we built this direct communication, direct link to our supporters that all came pretty close to upending the entire party establishment in 2003. No, the first time I ever saw any candidate do that was Donald Trump. In 2015, 2016, we had built Blog for America on our own. I mean, the coding and everything. Twitter at the time was his Blog for America. He would get up and he would post on Twitter, and 17 million people would be following him. And Pascal in the middle of the afternoon would say, hey, Fred, that's a great idea, blah, blah, blah. And guess what? Trump did it. And they built a direct connection with and now that's still what X is. It's still what Truth Social is. So if you're a farmer in Iowa and you're on Truth Social or following Trump on X or Elon and all that, it's a direct line. It's a direct relationship that keeps you glued to it. There is no such space. I mean, that's why Lincoln Square shows like that. I mean, and why when you see Mondami and other candidates who are basically trying to create that on their own somewhere to reach enough people to like get a message through. There is no such. There's no Truth Social, and I don't want to ever build that kind of a silo. But we don't have we have never. Again, regardless of whether there's a DLC-like message or whatever, or whoever the next candidate is, they're always built. Even Gavin Newsom is out there trying, like, this podcast trying to create something in this fractured media, and we've never learned the lesson that I think started with Dean, but I think that Trump should have taught everybody. That you have to build something like that to be able to not necessarily to get everybody to come to you, but if there's 5 million people that are following you and hanging on your every word and having that direct connection, that's going to be a pretty powerful group in a Democratic field for president in 2028. And if you can grow it big enough, that becomes the way to win the country over. But right now, it doesn't exist.
I think that it's particularly hard for Democrats because what Trump, who I've known Donald since the early 80s, and not the most book smart sort of person you'd ever meet.
Very kind.
And in fact, utterly ignorant of policy, and that really hurt me because I've spent my whole life trying to take policy seriously. But he is, a gut politician who knows the basic, knows that the basic art is addition. The Democrats, in my lifetime, have done the exact opposite. Their basic truth has been division, not addition. They divide themselves into various ethnic and identity groups. I think that there are more than 17 different identity caucuses that the DNC touts on its website. And, the image in my mind is that all these little anthills, whereas Trump is like one of these termite cathedrals. and it's hard to once you've divided people according to sexuality, according to race, according to ethnicity, according to gender, according to place of origin, and so on, it makes the job of bringing them all together that much more difficult. And, I watched, you watch the Democratic commentators on CNN, and they always fall into this trap, always. And I mentioned CNN because everybody is the same on MSNBC and everybody is pretty much the same on Fox. But, you would hope that, on CNN, you have some Republican conservative, but not Trumpist commentators like, say, Jonah Goldberg, who is going to have an independent, rational take on stuff. And then the Democrats, because they're afraid of alienating these little anthills of interest groups, it's as if they're perpetually walking on eggshells and afraid to piss people off. And if you don't, these days, if you don't tell people at least one thing they don't want to hear, they think you're full of it. You're just trying to roll me.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. And I wonder, Trippi, if, I think there's those little anthills have self-divided to a large degree. I don't think the Democrats necessarily told everyone they need to be either this or that. But I wonder if there's another strategy in there, Trippi, where the Democrats are trying to build a bigger tent full of those different constituencies, and if that's a challenge.
Well, it's always been easier for the Republicans to gather their, that big hill, because essentially they're monolith. Not, I mean, there's different factions within the party, but they're essentially not that diverse for obvious,
Right.
obviously. And so it makes it very easy, by the way, for that kind of a party to be taken over by an authoritarian. Why? Because it's top down. We're all, everything goes down. It's very easy for everybody to get their talking points, and then also to fear that once you've grabbed the party, that you're going to get purged, which they've done. On the Democrats, I mean, I understand exactly what Joe's saying, but the problem is, if you're going to be as diverse as the Democratic Party, there's always going to be a Jesse Jackson, for instance, who will try to, it's almost like there are leaders that emerge out of those different groups. Mm-hmm. And it's very hard for anybody to, unless they're the nominee for president of the United States, like a Barack Obama or somebody like that, can keep those leaders, those leaders of these different groups or factions moving in one direction. But when you don't have, when the leader of the party is not a president of the United States, it's now 6-7 people maybe looking to run for president, a party chairman, and the chairs never had much power when the president, to lead a party. So there's no one, which now means all these different are jockeying to become the leader of either their faction or a race for president. And I think that's created a real problem. The real problem of the Democratic Party right now is we're not fighting in my view, a party. We're fighting a movement of authoritarianism, or whatever you want to call it, that's being led by Trump. And to lead that, you have to lead an opposition movement that talks that and I think part of that is what's holding the party together right now is Trump, right? In other words, what all those factions all agree on right now, we got to stop him. And so, and I'm also not as worried about 2026 and this problem that Joe points out. I'm not worried about it so much. It's like Madami is not going to be nominated for the third district of Iowa, and Abigail Spanberger probably wouldn't be able to win the mayorship in New York. Maybe, but we don't know.
Oh yes, she would.
Well, no,
we did have a male version of Abigail Spanberger in Mike Bloomberg.
I'm not. Maybe she's not a good example, but my point is, I actually think that in the 18, 19, 24 districts that matter in the battleground House districts, the Democrats are going to nominate in Iowa's 3rd district somebody who could win Iowa's 3rd district, and so I'm not as worried about the sort of lack of a leader right now or a core message. My experience through 8 or 9 of these things is there's only one way to solve that problem, and it'll be when somebody pulls off winning the nomination for president in 2028, if we have an election. So that's sort of my where by the way, Joe and I disagree about whether there'll be an election in 2028 or not. So there will be one. I just question whether the votes will be counted in the way they need to be.
I question whether the Democrats are going to be able to come up with a coherent program. I mean, the basic problem is, what do the Democratic Party, when I was a kid and before I was a kid, when I was just a twinkle in my parents' eyes, was that it would bring various very disparate groups together. Big city machine politicians, Southern, rural white segregationists, No matter how big their differences were, Franklin Roosevelt or John Kennedy would start from the things that we have in common. And that is impossible for the Democrats now, because if you say a simple sentence like, all people are created equal and should be treated equally, then you get Democrats coming in with codicils like, what about affirmative action? What about, preferences for this group or that group? I saw back to CNN, they have a Latina woman commenting on Trump, and she immediately brings it down to the Latina community, rather than in my experience and in my family, I might add, where we have Latinos and Latinas. The default position for Latinos is, I'm an American first, not these are my special interests. And yet the Democrats have trained themselves, they've shackled themselves to this way of thinking that makes it impossible for the Democratic Party to be what the Democratic Party always was, which is a vast coalition.
Mm-hmm. Well, I really appreciate both of you coming on, and you got a taste of the disagreement right here in who would win the New York mayoral primary. I know there will be much more of that to come. The Two Joes, you can see it on Lincoln Square, 3 p.m. on Wednesdays. And who do you guys have coming up this week as your guest?
Well, we have your very own Stuart Stevens.
Yes, that's right.
And what I'm really curious about is what he thinks about the Democratic Party. We kind of know what he thinks about the Republican Party these days, but he has always been a very sharp-eyed observer, and someone I always respected. And I'm going to be really interested to see what he's thinking right now in this current situation.
Yeah, and Stuart and I had battled each other for decades, in Senate races and other things, and it's just been a joy to be working with him at the Lincoln Project, and looking really forward to having him on the show this Wednesday. Yeah.
Great. Well, definitely don't miss that one. It should be a really great discussion, and hopefully we can get a few more of the war stories from both of you, because and if you guys want to start with the vodka on air, if that helps, we're totally open to it at Lincoln Square. We're very liberal in the classical sense.
Yes,
but yeah, we can't wait to see this episode, and thank you both for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, guys.
Yes, my pleasure.
So good. Yeah, that's so much fun. It's great because, I know that a lot of people tune in to Strategy Session every week with Joe Trippi and Rick Wilson and Stuart Stevens. And Rick and Stuart bring that perspective of being longtime Republican consultants, and they know, all of the rhetorical tricks and where the party is coming from. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really great to have this show with the Two Joes, because, they're kind of putting the Democratic Party under the microscope. You've got Joe Trippi, obviously, who was, inside, outside the Democratic Party, kind of a maverick. And then Joe Klein as a journalist, as a columnist, having that critical eye and kind of seeing all the tricks that politicians play. So I think that's really a great perspective for those of us, who have not been inside that world.
Yeah, I think one thing that really I loved hearing them talk about was Klein said, Trippi looks at the numbers, at the polling, and Klein takes those stories and spins them, but polling is the story in and of itself, right? Mm-hmm. It's just a different way to tell a story, and I think that their little disagreements are magic, but it all comes down to framing and storytelling and humanity, and there's so much loaded into their stories. I love it.
Yeah. And Joe Trippi was bringing up Rocana as one of the people he helped and was told that he'd never work in this town again. And we actually have the representative on today. I'm very excited that I'm going to be speaking with him at 2:00 today. He, of course, has co-sponsored the resolution to release the Epstein files, which is one of the many things that Congress is not doing during their vacation, or as we like to call it, the federal government shutdown. So that will be really, I think, a fascinating conversation.
That's going to be awesome. We've had this booked for a long time, so I'm glad it's finally here. But also, it's almost November.
Yeah.
I'm also very excited. Later today, Maya May will be with Randy Weingarten and Imara Jones to talk about, something that's really important to Maya, which is the destruction of our system of education and the scapegoating of trans and, essentially non-white people. So those are Imara Jones and Randy Weingarten are two massive powerhouses in that space.
Yeah.
And I think that's really going to make news, that show.
Yeah, and we had Randy on several weeks ago because she has a new book out. She's, of course, the president of the AFT Teachers Union. And I'm sure they have just a lot to say because during this government shutdown, the Department of Education has been firing even more people, including, all the folks who take care of kids with special needs and disabilities. Just something that just thousands upon thousands of families rely on. And so that should be just a really great conversation. I love that, one of the things that we do on Lincoln Square is, we want to talk with the people who really know what is going on with some of these big stories that you read about. We want to talk with the people who know what's going on in the Trump administration from the inside, who have been fighting these battles for years. And so that's why it's great to have people like Randy Weingarten on for shows like that.
I love it. And, it's fun because we have so many great hosts, by the way, that Maya reaches out and she's like, hey, I really want to talk about this. And I'm like, yeah, it's an important thing. We need to talk about it.
Absolutely.
Bobby Jones tomorrow night has Amy McGrath, an interview with Amy McGrath, which is going to be wonderful. He's already taped. So I love that show.
Yeah. And she's running again for the Senate. And, what's wonderful is that, it's not just going to be your typical interview of, hey, what's your platform? And, why are you doing this? They're both veterans. And so Bobby can talk with her from that perspective and to talk about national security and what's at stake and have just a much more robust discussion than I think, you'll find in a lot of places.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. Bobby is, man, he's great. He always makes me come on at the last minute. He's like, man, I need you, buddy. I'm like, okay.
At some point, I think we're all going to have to chip in and get you a sport coat for that day,
yes.
Because, it's game day and you got to be prepared. You can't just be in your carpool outfit. Well, we'll know that that's when Sam means business.
Yeah. Well, the thing, I'm generally and just by nature a very curious person, and so it's such a thrill to talk to a guy like Bobby, and really talking to an expert on anything and somebody who's passionate about the thing that they love is such a gift. It's such a treat, and I think, hopefully that always comes through with our shows, that we really try to find people who are experts.
Yes. And because, pundits are a dime a dozen, and, it's always fun to kind of give your take on things. And like a couple weeks ago, like, Sam and I were talking about Marjorie Taylor Greene on this show and like her heel turn with Trump and what that was about. And then when we brought in our chief of staff at the Lincoln Project, Ryan Wiggins, who has been a political strategist for years and, has worked within Republican administrations, she was like, well, what this is really about is that Marjorie Taylor Greene wanted to be senator and Trump wouldn't give her, his support. And that's what all this is about. And so it's just, we want to bring that perspective to you, not just a bunch of people who are talking for the sake of talking, but people who really know what they're talking about. And, with this show in particular, our focus is, you and our community and what we can all do as part of this fight. Because, none of us, just want to be passive observers in this time of history. We are in this together, and, you are such an important part of Lincoln Square. And that's why, if you can afford to upgrade your subscription and to support our work, we so appreciate it, because, that it goes to support things like Ken Harbaugh's work in Ukraine, coming back with that incredible report that he brought to us a couple weeks ago. And, right from the front lines, it's that sort of thing. Not just, we're not just, trying to like give you a bunch of content. It's about folks who are in this fight with you, and we're trying to build this community with you.
Yeah, this story, Stephen Beschloss a couple of months ago said, look, we look at history as this neat linear sort of series of events. One thing caused the next, caused the next, caused the next. Is very neat. But when you're in it, right, when you're standing on a ship getting ready to storm Normandy, there's no clarity. You don't know what the next step is. And we're in that moment right this very second. And I feel like the stories that we try to produce, both in writing, in the writing that you edit, Susan, which is incredible, and the content that we put up here is about pulling out all of the history that's happening every single hour of our lives, and trying to make sense of it so that in the future, when we're looking back, we know where we've come.
And I would urge you that if you want to read more on that particular subject, you should definitely check out Sam's weekly installment of Winners and Losers, where he talks about this fog of war that we're in. And I think you'll really enjoy how he came to his particular choices this week. Which it's only the second time that Donald Trump has graced the losers column, but there's a very good reason for it. So, and that is something that we do have just for our paid subscribers. It's one of those special features, and Sam always does a really incredible job with that. So,
Thank you.
Take the time to plug that right now.
Yeah, share it out, everyone. Share it far and wide.
And for this week, for our weekly assignment for everyone, probably a story that you've seen a little bit over the weekend is that come November 1st, which, as Sam mentioned, is creeping up on us. It's hard to believe. But the Trump's USDA has been threatening to end SNAP benefits, food stamps, for 40 million people as part of this ongoing Trump government shutdown. That would just be so devastating for so many families across the country. Going back to what we were saying at the beginning, in both red states and blue, this is not a partisan issue. It really is a lifeline for so many people. And it's one of those, it's not an unintended consequence of the shutdown. This is an intended consequence. It kind of highlights just the absurdity of where we're at right now, that because we have this shutdown that Republicans have pushed, that now people may not be able to afford food on their table. So if you can, we've got the numbers so you can call the switchboards for both your members of Congress, for your senators, and tell them that this is not something that you support. This is not something that they should support. And this is a direct result of Trump's shutdown that definitely should not still be going on.
No, and I think to add a little fuel to your fire, this is from a government website landing page. They're using, I mean, this is illegal as far as we know, right?
Right. There's this little thing called the Hatch Act. I know it's important.
But they're blaming Democrats. So they're messaging this on government websites. We need to be messaging this directly to our members of Congress, our representatives and our senators. You have to call because they're going to get ahead of us in messaging.
Right. Absolutely. And it's just absurd, this idea that Democrats somehow, are not supportive of food assistance. But nonetheless, again, as we were talking about with the Joes, Republicans have been very effective at messaging, but that's the fight that we're in, and we're here to do our small part to fight back.
That's right.
And we appreciate you tuning in. This was a great episode with the two Joes. Again, they're on at 3 p.m. on Wednesdays. We do a replay over the weekend in case you've missed it. And of course, you can play it at any time when we post the article. And we are just so happy that you tuned in this morning. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.